Hello and welcome to Hot Issues. Well, today we're going to take a look at the International Monetary Fund and its relations with Ghana. We've been there before. In 1983, we embarked upon the Economic Recovery Program, and we continued on that path through to the Structural Adjustment Program and Enhanced Structural Adjustment Program. Have we had any benefits from our relations with the International Monetary Fund? And what are we to expect from the current government's negotiations with the IMF? What would happen to the Ghanaian economy? These are some of the issues that we want to discuss today. Welcome to Hot Issues. Welcome back to Hot Issues. As I indicated, today we are taking a look at the International Monetary Fund and its relationship with Ghana. Are you to expect anything new from the current government's negotiations with the International Monetary Fund? And what would that impact be on the Ghanaian economy? And to do this discussion with us is Mr. Kwamena Essilfie Adjaye, who is an economist. So you're welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Do you, by any chance, know why the government is going to the IMF at this time?
Normally, governments approach the IMF when the economy runs into balance of payment difficulties, imbalance in trade, imbalance in the capital account, or overall balance of payments difficulties, when the currency is weak or is depreciating, when public finance is not good, big and increasing budget deficit. Yeah. So the major factors that drive the decision to go to the IMF are present in the Ghanaian economy of today. But the most important of them is the balance of payments and the currency, the exchange rate of the currency, the performance of the currency. So if you look at it that way, you would say the government, in deciding in August that it would go to the IMF to discuss, to negotiate, to arrange a facility, did so with full knowledge and appreciation that the economic condition was difficult and it needed assistance.
So we are assuming that this is why the government has gone to the IMF.
Although we like to use the word assumption as economists, in this case, you and I, I'm sure, have both heard members of government, among other reasons, say that it's because we're facing economic difficulties. And in actual fact, the decision could even have come earlier. Some of us have felt that why did we have first, since the beginning of the year, when the Bank of Ghana imposed those measures that I publicly opposed, why did government have to wait that long if it would eventually have to go to the IMF for assistance? But here we are. We've gone past the formal notice to the IMF. The next step usually is the discussion, which was held in Accra, then the negotiations, which have begun in Washington during the annual meeting of the fund and the World Bank. So I am of the view that we all know that the economy hasn't been performing well. We all know that the cost of living has been increasing. We all know that our currency was weak, by one account, the weakest in the world after Ukraine's currency. We all know that the government finance has been in a bad way, so to speak. So if indeed these are the conditions, the factors that lead a government to decide to go to the IMF, then we have to say that our government took the decision driven by these difficult economic conditions.
What makes anybody think that the IMF can resolve these problems?
Well, if you look at it critically, it's difficult to say that the IMF has succeeded in improving the economic performance of any country that has gone to it for assistance. And it's not only less developed countries, so to speak, that have gone to the IMF for assistance. In 1976, the UK went to the IMF. In 1981, Mitterrand's government, soon after assuming power, went to the IMF. In 2006, 2007, 2008, the fast performing, growing East African countries, East Asian countries, a number of them did go to the IMF. The way the IMF facilities or programs are, you have to go through a period of retrenchment, of reduction of public expenditure, of increase in subsidies, which really affect the living conditions of people. And then at the end of that, it's expected that the public finance would improve, the balance of payments would improve. But there have been very few countries which, after swallowing that medicine, so to speak, have had this effect of an improvement in public finance, an improvement in balance of payments, which then lead to an overall improvement in economic performance. So what we development economists, say is that you have to begin by understanding the role the IMF is supposed to play, which is that you go to it when you admit that you have an economic or you're experiencing economic difficulties. So it gives you some money.
Ghana has done IMF programs over the last 30 years and so on.
Yes.
Have the problems been overcome?
Hell no.
So why do we go there again?
Well, we've gone there again because the government of the day has concluded that given how difficult the economic condition is, and since the factors that are supposed to be determining when a decision is being made as to whether or not to go are in favor of going, then let's go. Let's go for a facility.
But you said from the beginning,
yes,
that you thought that we should have gone earlier. Why would we go earlier just to waste our time?
You see, my view is that when you are managing an economy, you must be on top of the job hourly, daily. If you observe an imbalance in any aspect of the economy, as a manager, you must take steps. Sometimes you must even take proactive steps. Okay. It was clear at the end of last year that we had started experiencing serious foreign exchange rate problems. It seems now, every year towards the end of the year, demand for foreign exchange increases. But last year was greater than what happens seasonally, and it continued through to the beginning of this year. Then the Bank of Ghana came out with these measures, which some of us knew were wrong-headed, and I said so publicly, and would not work. We had to wait some months before they would admit that the measures didn't work. At that time, if I had been advising government, I would have said this is the time to look critically at taking steps to improve our foreign account and to improve our domestic finance account. Whether that would have meant going to the IMF or not is a secondary consideration. Because if you ask me...
But you said that you thought that the government should have gone much earlier. My question is, if going to the IMF would not solve the problem, why would you say that we should have gone much earlier?
We should have gone much earlier in the sense that if government intended to go to the IMF, then it should have gone, or it could have gone earlier than it did. because you do not wait really till the condition gets worse than it was, say, at the beginning of the year before going. Okay, but when you look at the history of our relationship with the IMF, you enumerated the major facilities we've received from the IMF. The bigger overall program, the economic recovery program, the structural adjustment program, the enhanced facilities, and so on. If what they prescribe, which is that you make these changes so as to improve public finance, increase revenue, control expenditure, then it begs the question, why haven't we had a significant improvement in public finance in the intervening years? The other leg, if we are to experience a significant improvement in international accounts, then why haven't we? And it's because the IMF programs really resolve or address short-term issues. They do not go to the medium and longer term structural issues, which will give us the foundation to have better public finance and better balance of payment accounts. And if you have an ailment, when you go to the doctor, and the IMF is the doctor, and the doctor gives you medicine, fine, you take it to recover. But thereafter, you have to live your life well, so you don't get the ailment again. And this is the aspect that we haven't been able to do.
Can we focus some attention on the falling value of the national currency? We went to the IMF much earlier, but let's take 1983 as the base year.
Okay. Between
1983 and now, our currency has been devalued by something like 26,000%. Instead of us going before the IMF and lying prostrate and doing all the things they tell us, why would we go to the IMF again when they have so woefully failed?
The reason is just the last point I was making. The IMF truly, really addresses short-term problems.
But even short-term, our currency has not appreciated. 26,000% since we went there. Devaluation.
Well, we call it, when you don't have a fixed rate, it's depreciation, but that's neither here nor there.
Depreciation, devaluation, the rate has gone down 26,000%. Why are we still going there?
Because the government recognizes that there is a difficult condition economically, and has decided that the opportunity the IMF provides for some short-term relief in terms of finance from a facility, and as they've been keen to add technical support, is going to be worthwhile to manage this current crisis. But I have always believed that whether or not you manage the crisis, if you do not make structural changes, medium and long term, you will sooner than later have the same cyclical problems to deal with. And that has really been our record. It's not so much that the facilities haven't given us the hoped for results. It's more that the governments have not taken these steps structurally to change the Ghanaian economy so that medium to long term we wouldn't have repeat of these cyclical problems. And
so what accounts for the problems with the city? Why is the city falling? I mean, over a period of about a year, it's falling by 40%. Why?
Because the city is a commodity, the currency. People demand it, people supply it. I was at pains when I reacted to the measures imposed in early February by the Bank of Ghana, that the problem was a supply problem, and it flows from the point I've been making. We have very high demand for foreign currency. If you're not exporting enough to earn from your exports foreign currency, if you do not have enough inflow, official, private remittances to supply you the foreign currency you need to meet the high demand, you will have a mismatch of demand and supply, and the excess demand will put pressure on your currency. This, in basic economic terms, is the reason our currency has been weak. So what you do...
What about the situation in which you are not exporting enough, but you are producing enough of the things that you need?
That would work if the demand side is lower or is controlled. But in economics, we know it's more difficult to control demand than it is to affect supply. So, regardless of what the structure of your export sector is, and we really haven't moved far from Gordon Speck's description of our export sector in 1929. It's not been transformed enough. Non-traditional exports now are 2 billion and more, but they need to be greater. Okay, so as long as we demand foreign currency to pay for our imports of goods and services, or for servicing debt, and this exceeds significantly the amount we earn from our exports and inflows and so forth, we will have a weak currency. So the way to do it is to look at the main blocks, the factors. Look at your export sector. How do you improve it, increase it? Look at domestic production of importable goods. In the 60s, sometimes these days when I discuss with younger people, they say, is it true? Did we produce these many things? We, Nkrumah, set us on the path that put us ahead of so many countries in Africa, in Asia, even in Europe.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why the emphasis is on exports. Why? Do we necessarily have to export?
No, I've not.
Don't we export only because there are things that we don't produce here for which we need foreign exchange and so on? Is that not the reason why we export?
Well, I was going to get back to that. But
okay, sir.
You need to have a bigger manufacturing sector. You need to be producing as many things as you can possibly produce so as to reduce the demand for imports. On the export side, if we have goods which are demanded outside, which we can produce here, which across the globe have demand, then of course we should produce those and export. But we should be doing both. But in the past 40 years or so, we haven't done either side enough, seriously, vigorously. We haven't invested and encouraged investment in manufacturing, in processing as much as we should have. And at the same time, we haven't really driven our export potential, exploited our export potential as much as we could have. To be able sustainably to have a currency that is able to maintain its strength in relation to other currencies, you must have this two-pronged approach done properly. Because if not, you will continually find yourself in the situation that we found ourselves in, where it's difficult to control demand, but our supply of foreign exchange isn't enough to satisfy the demand. So whether we like it or not, until we do this, we will continue to have this experience. And what an IMF facility can do is a short-term, should I say, way of addressing the current problem. But the structural change that we should have in this economy, so that more people can be employed with a bigger in a bigger manufacturing sector, in an agricultural sector that is transforming, the sort of transformation that Nkrumah started, in an export sector that is expanding. Until we have that, we will have really a weak economy in which from time to time the currency would be under severe pressure, and in which government will have difficulty with its finances, because when you have a bigger and expanding economy with taxes having to be paid, then government finance can improve. So the IMF will prescribe, as it always does, that government expenditure must be controlled, must be cut. The IMF will prescribe, as it always does, that government revenue must be increased. But in the short term, whatever measures are taken are easier to be taken on the expenditure side than on the revenue side, which is why with all the facilities we've had retrenchment, layoffs, imposition of subsidies, increase in user fees and so on. These prescriptions are normal with an IMF facility.
Hello and welcome back to Hot Issues, and we are in conversation with Mr. Kwamena Essilfie Adjaye, an economist, and we're looking at the IMF and its relations with Ghana. Indeed, we're looking at the recent decision of the government of Ghana to enter into negotiations with the IMF. And just before we went on the break, I informed Mr. Essilfie Adjaye that we would like him to pay some attention to the short-term measures which have been recommended by the IMF over the period, and whether indeed the implementation of these measures have brought any reliefs at all. What are some of the short-term measures?
In the 80s, government was advised, in fact, as part of the conditions, to reduce the size of government. We had retrenchment. In reaction to the retrenchment, there was PAMSCAD, to reduce
a program of action to mitigate the social consequences of adjustment.
Yes,
of the IMF program.
Yes,
okay.
We had PAMSCAD. So let's take it that from 83, 84, there was concerted action to reduce, to control the size of government. Fine. But what has happened since then? But then you have to consider this in the context of the role of government in an economy like Ghana, or in a state like Ghana, at the stage of development that we are in. And government has to play a large role. Social services have to be delivered to people. So if you have large-scale retrenchment, which affects delivery of government services, in time, whatever government there is would demand from the populace for government service, for social services. The government will have to react by attempting to serve the people in those respects. So I don't think that program had any chance of having a long-term effect. All it did,
but it wasn't the unemployment problem also.
Naturally,
within 1 year, we trained 300,000 workers.
Naturally, it did.
So we didn't solve any problem.
No. From the perspective of the IMF, it reduced the size of government. But
also reduced the capacity of government to deliver
services, as I was saying.
Exactly. And then worsen the unemployment problem.
Precisely. To have done this properly, we should have had a companion facility or program by government which ensured and assisted the private sector to expand, to absorb those who were being retrenched. And it's in that sense that this PAMS card was designed and
the private sector is not a social service organization. The private sector is motivated by the maximization of profit. It doesn't go out to solve unemployment problems. It only contributes to solving unemployment problems for as long as that is generating profit.
Yes and no. If you are a government managing an economy and you are making adjustments, let's use the IMF term, you are making adjustments in the public sector, you must ensure that there is corresponding adjustment in the private sector to absorb some of the bad effects of the adjustment in the public sector. The delivery of social services I mentioned earlier, that is the role of government. And it's unfortunate that we accepted then from the IMF a prescription that reduced the level of employment in the social services area, and that adversely affected the ability of government to deliver social services. But let's move from social services.
Just a minute. Would you say that job creation is a primary function of private capital?
Well, you and I think we've had this discussion before, but let me address it differently today.
Is job creation a private function of private sector?
The private sector function, you've mentioned it already. People set up private businesses to make money. In making money, they have to produce goods and services. The goods and services have to be produced by machines and human beings. So whatever element or complement of human capital that is needed for the production of goods and services, the private individual who is setting up his business will then make sure he has it if he wants to operate.
So job creation is not primary.
Job creation isn't primary.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. Job creation isn't the primary driving factor. Is profit making, not job creation. That isn't even taught in business schools, if I should put it that way. But going back to answer the question you posed, so that is one which had the short term effect of reducing the size of government, but the effect was to increase unemployment, and it happened at a time, not that it's much different now, when the private sector didn't have the support, didn't have the capacity, didn't have the financial ability, didn't have the technical support to absorb some who could have been absorbed by an expanding private sector. Okay. You can look also at let me use a different example. On the other end, the balance of payment end is to ensure that you increase our exports. Have our exports increased significantly?
They have in volumes. Well, exports have increased in volume since 1983.
But value is dependent on the price of the goods that you export.
Exactly.
Yeah. The non-traditional sector has increased. Okay. But if you graph it over the last 30 years or so, the rate of growth hasn't been that great. The countries that have really succeeded in the post-World War era significantly to change the standard of living of their people, a majority of them have done it with major export push. You look at the East Asian countries, even China, the recent years, the last quarter of a century, a major factor in its growth has been the growth of its export sector. But as a nation, you must look at the condition of the people in your country, to ensure that whatever is happening, people's lives, their living standards improve, that they are earning livable wages, that these are increasing over time, that the rate of increase of prices of goods and services isn't too great, so that the cost of living doesn't become too expensive for the average person. If a nation has economic managers that don't concentrate on all of these aspects and factors, you'll have dislocation in some areas, and you'll have a situation where you could see an enclave, an export enclave develop. And we've had that really with the oil and gas industry. It's a new industry, but what is the effect on the Ghanaian economy, the local economy? How much local content is involved in the oil industry?
Before we get there, let's stick with exports for a while.
All right.
Shouldn't we be interested in what we're exporting? I mean, you take cocoa and so on. Mm-hmm. You're exporting other people's dessert. They can do away with it. Mm-hmm. The price keeps tumbling all the time. You increase production, the price comes down. Is it very sensible to continue to be hampering on the export of cocoa beans and so on?
What countries that have been able successfully to increase sustainably their export sector have done is to go more and more into processing and into manufacturing. As you and I sit here, you know as I do that the Malaysians got, and we should be saying this here, the Malaysians got oil palm from Ghana. The last time I checked, from oil palm alone, they are earning about $6 billion. So many products being produced, processed and manufactured products from oil palm. Why shouldn't we be doing the same in Ghana?
And do we need to go to IMF for us to realize that the way out of our problem is to manufacture?
No, we don't.
So why are we wasting our time with IMF and World Bank and all of them?
It's like you have a problem, you have to address it, you have the know-how to address it locally.
You have a burdensome sore on your toe, and you choose to go to the carpenter to solve the problem for you.
That's a great analogy. I wasn't going to use an analogy as drastic as that. But anyway, back to the export story. Mm-hmm. See, if we do not process more, if we do not manufacture more, we'll be at the mercy of commodity price swings. It's in processed goods, it's in manufactured goods that more can be earned. And those have prices that do not fluctuate as much as commodity prices fluctuate. So we should have been going in this direction decades ago. And nothing stops us to be doing that, to start doing that seriously, vigorously, boldly from now.
You've spoken quite a bit about the fact that we are not earning enough and so on. Have you ever looked at it from the point of view of control of our resources? For example, enormous amount of gold. Are we maximizing returns on gold?
Kwesi, in 93-94, I led a fight against the sale of AGC. Took government to court on that and so on. I've been interviewed a lot, but not by you, on the effect of the gold industry in Ghana. And in many of the interviews, I've liked to compare Tarkwa or Boase to Johannesburg. No, very little difference in time between the discovery of gold or the modern production of gold in the two countries, whether Tarkwa in Ghana or Boase versus Joburg. But look at the huge difference. And the simplest way of taking a serious analytical view and drawing a conclusion from that is that we have not done what we could have done to benefit as much as we should have from the resource. Okay.
So that explains why national revenues are so low.
If
to some extent.
Yes, if you have a resource which is worth this much and you do not organize yourself so that you have Ghanaians here and abroad contribute capital to own significant shares, significant proportions of these national assets, then you have foreign capital come in and do it for you. Foreign capital will repatriate. They have no other incentive than to repatriate. We, of course, aren't earning enough from our natural resources. And there are many factors. But I like to begin with who owns it. We own it.
Do we?
Remember, we own it in the sense that it's within our borders. Okay? But let's look secondly at who really owns it. To really truly own it, you must come up with the capital, the technology to exploit it. If we as a nation will not put together from our own resources, from the resources of Ghanaians in Ghana and abroad, the capital to be able to own these resources, and we allow foreign countries to come or foreign companies to come in and do this, we'll continue not to benefit as much as we should. See, this requires, as far as I'm concerned, proactive government. If Mine X, not too different from what a champion did by controlling the commanding heights of the economy. If Mine X needs $200 million, okay, investment or for controlling interest, of course, within and outside Ghana, in this day and age, we should be able to raise $200 million. And government should take the lead in marshalling the funds from Ghanaians to raise the amount of capital required. The Ghanaians with all the range of skills and expertise required in virtually any of these areas, put them together. Let them then control these resources for us. Otherwise, we can't get what we should from them.
And, sir,
yes,
I'm going to ask whether, all of these measures would also have an aspect which insists on privatization. We're hearing stories about the privatization of the distribution of electricity.
As you well know, we've had, as part of earlier programs, requirement that certain industries, certain sectors be privatized. So you could have in the forthcoming facility, as one of the terms or conditionalities, requirement or suggestion, strong suggestion that certain services, certain industries, certain particular aspects of the economy be privatized. That also wouldn't be atypical. It would be typical of an IMF facility.
Would you agree that put together all of these measures can worsen the hardship faced by ordinary Ghanaians?
Well, it's difficult to find a country in which immediately after the imposition of an IMF program, you haven't had a worsening of the condition of the people, of the living condition. Because when the fees of services, social services, are demanded to be increased, of course it will hit the ordinary or the Ghanaian. When some other user fees are required to be increased, of course that would have an effect. So invariably, country by country, and I don't know any country that has been an exception, when you've had an imposition of an IMF facility which requires improvement of government finance, which therefore requires an increase in revenue and a decrease in expenditure, that you wouldn't have such an effect immediately after it's imposed.
Why would any government going for an election in 2 years embark upon this kind of path?
I think that's more a political question that I would rather leave to the politicians. But let me stick to the economic.
As an economist, I mean, even when you go for, if a government came to you for advice and you knew that it was going to go for elections in 2 years, would you offer the government this kind of advice?
As I said earlier, if we had to go, we could have gone earlier. But let me react to that differently. We have a difficult economic condition. So how do we get out of it? Some, if not a majority of the prescriptions that we are likely to get from the IMF, we could easily come up with them ourselves. As I've just enumerated or explained, these are things you find typically in IMF facilities. So if we know that this is what we will be asked to do, it begs the question, why do we have to go to be told to do them? And I'll give you an answer. If you know you have to increase government revenue, and you know that to bring the deficit under control or to decrease it, you have to decrease government expenditure. It's a very difficult political step to take. But perhaps if the suggestion is coming from outside, it then makes it easier for you to take. Then you could say, this is the prescription we've been given.
Who is more important in this discussion about our future and how to deal with our problems and so on? Is it the people of Ghana, or these Western institutions which have more or less led us to our doom?
The people of Ghana will ever be central to any discussion, any decision making about what has to be done in Ghana for Ghanaians. But as I've said a number of times, when you're faced with a problem, you have to find a solution. And one way of describing what is happening is that the government has decided that the solution, not that we don't know the solution, that it's better to get it prescribed for us from outside. Then maybe it might be easier to take politically. Because then if these difficult measures are being implemented, it could always be said that, well, they are part of an IMF facility, an IMF program, rather than that they are part of a government program domestically, if you will, designed and being implemented. So it gives cover, if you will. If you look at it from a different perspective, from the international perspective, if it's known that a nation such as Ghana has been having problems with its currency, with its government finance, with the inflation going up, these major macroeconomic indices that they need to be addressed, then it's known that the nation has gone to the IMF for a facility which necessarily will be addressing these problems. Then it's supposed to give the country some sort of respectability, or let me use the word again, cover, for taking the steps that clearly have to be taken.
I've looked at your CV. And There's information there that you used to advise the World Bank and also used to advise some government agencies and other international organizations like AFAD and so on. Now, based on all of those experiences, how much do you think that we're likely to get from this negotiation in terms of cash support, monetary support? How much are we likely to get?
Oh, we could get in the neighborhood of $1 billion. We could.
Is that sufficient to deal with all the problems that you yourself have described so eloquently?
Let me give you a circuitous answer. In mid-September, specifically on September 11th, we had two major events. The Eurobond, the 1 billion Eurobond, and the 1.7 Cocoa Board syndicated loan, a total of 2.7 billion. Thereafter, those of us who study movements in the foreign exchange market, there's been decrease in the depreciation of the cedi. We've had even some periods.
The cedi is appreciated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the easy answer is that, well, the inflow or expectation of inflow in the short term of 1.7 billion is related to this improvement in the value of the cedi. Okay. If that is the case, and we end up with a facility of, say, $1 billion, that would be less than what those two events gave us. Okay. So if you want to extrapolate, then we could still have a strengthening of the cedi, but it may not be as strong or last as long as what these two developments have given us. So if we get about $1 billion, I wouldn't be surprised.
US dollars?
Yes, I wouldn't be surprised. But you see, Kwesi, it all amounts.
Is that all? Is that all?
No. Well,
just that all?
What I was just saying was my way of saying that will not be all. Okay. In relation to those two events, clearly that would not be all. But Kwesi, if we got $1 billion, right, and it went into areas that we really need or are experiencing shortage of foreign exchange, either to implement programs and projects which are needed by the nation, then we will have some.
We will use that money to pay all the foreign contractors who are here doing roads and other projects, and the money is going to go right back to Europe and Asia. And we'll be left with nothing, and we'll start all over again.
Well, I was in my fashion going to get to that point. If we had that come in, and we did not in the short term begin to make serious changes in contracting, in government procurement, in use of let's use the term in vogue now, local content, we will end up as you've just described. So, there are steps that we need to take as a nation in the management, in the running of this economy that we haven't taken for decades. And if we do not take these, all we'll have will be a short-term palliative. And medium to long term, we will not have established the basis for sustainable growth that improves the standard of living of Ghanaians. Thank you, Kwesi.
Thank you very much for coming. Well, we've been in conversation with Mr. Kwamena Essilfie, an economist. He's advised the World Bank. He's advised international organizations such as AFAD. He's been an advisor in the Ghana's Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning and other places. I just hope that this discussion shed some light on the dealings with the IMF over the years and now. And please, don't shift your dial, because the best comes from TV3.